I am not a doctor, and this is not medical advice. Always consult a physician for medical advice. I'm going to share with you my experience with post-finasteride syndrome and what I did to recover from it. I'll start off by defining the word recover in this context because when I read people's accounts on the forum of recovering from PFS, it seems like they kind of use the term loosely. They say stuff like, hey, I'm recovered from post-finasteride syndrome as long as I don't do these certain XYZ things. Or they'll say stuff like, I'm recovered, but sometimes I relapse. And to me, that's not really a recovery. It's just kind of controlling the symptoms to where they aren't as bad, or it's some kind of a temporary recovery that it doesn't actually last. The recovery I'm going to describe has returned me to the state I was before I took finasteride, with a little caveat. Right now, I'm 23 years older from when I first started taking finasteride. So it's really hard to say, I feel like I did 23 years ago, because I'm not even sure that's possible in someone who didn't go through PFS, because someone isn't going to feel the same way that they do now. Fast forward 23 years later, they're not going to feel identical. Things are going to slow down eventually. What I can say is that now I can exercise as hard and as much as I want without feeling crashy or bad. I can eat whatever crap food I want, including loads of sugar, which I have definitely tested thoroughly. I've never really had I should also mention, a big part of this is people wondering about, erections and sexual dysfunction. And I never really had great difficulty getting erections or having sex, although I don't feel like my libido was as strong as it should have been. So in other words, I think PFS affected my libido, but I never had major issues in erectile dysfunction. But all of that, all of the sexual part of me is now functioning as it should. And the biggest problem that I had, which was brain fog, which is why I even chose the username BrongFogBoy, has been completely recovered, as well as things like anhedonia, which, if you don't know, anhedonia is basically you can't really derive pleasure from normally enjoyed activities. Basically, I was like a zombie. That's how I would describe it. Just always like a zombie all the time. And not like the entertaining zombies on Walking Dead. It was just like a lifeless person, pretty much. So let me do a really quick backstory about me. I've been a member of the Propecia Help forum boards for like over 10 years and have posted hundreds of times on that board. Many, many times. I don't know exactly how many times, but I'm telling you this so you know I'm not just some random person that came out of nowhere claiming to have the latest snake oil magic procedure to recover you from finasteride, which seemed to happen all the time on the forum boards. Someone comes in and says they're cured because they did something crazy, and then they leave and they're never heard from again. Well, the username I go by on Propecia Help forums and Solve PFS before it went away, the username is BrongFogBoy. And to be sure you know it's me, I created a post. To be sure you know that it's me making this video, I created a post on Propecia Help forum boards just before publishing this video. And it has a link to this video, so you can confirm I am the same person who has been around and contributed to this community for years. Now, I don't remember the exact timeline, but the gist of this is I started noticing thinning hair at around 18 years old. And so I started Finasteride at around 18 years old. I didn't even notice the side effects because they were so slow to set in that I just didn't notice anything. So I took Propecia for around 7 years without really noticing that there were minor side effects. And then I switched to Proscar, which is basically, it's just a cheaper version of Propecia, but it has the same active ingredient of Finasteride. Finasteride is the active ingredient in all of these hair loss drugs. And I stayed on that Proscar for around 2 years or so. And then came Avodart, which, if you remember, Avodart is it's much stronger than Finasteride. It has something called dutasteride in it, I believe, is what it's called. And once I started taking that Avodart, the side effects were huge. I noticed gigantic side effects, which at that point I got off of it like after a year or so of taking it. So after Avodart, for whatever reason, I didn't go back to Proscar and just stopped taking anything for hair loss for the first time in like 10 years. So in other words, for 10 straight years, I had been having some type of alpha reductase inhibitor running in my body, and I just stopped all of it. So then after about 3 days, maybe 3 to 6 days of being off of everything, I suddenly felt this huge rush of energy and like a vitality that I hadn't had in a really long time, like at least 5 years or so. It's really hard to tell with these timelines. And that's kind of when I put it together that not just Avodart, but Finasteride had been giving me the side effects, but they were just so subtle at first that it was hard to notice. It was like the frog in the boiling water. So I definitely had side effects before I stopped Finasteride. I just didn't realize it. That's the point I'm trying to make. I wasn't sure at the time what was going on, so I went back on Finasteride, and then I didn't feel as good. So I was just kind of figuring out. I wasn't 100% sure that it was the Finasteride or what was going on. I just felt amazing, felt this big rush of energy, better than I had felt in 5 or 10 years. Then I went back on Finasteride, and then I reverted back. So I got off of Finasteride again the following week, and again I had that same rush of energy and vitality come back to me. And at that point, I felt so good, I was positive that I would rather feel like that than try to avoid hair loss. So I decided to completely stop everything. No more hair loss drugs at all. And that's when I felt great for around a week and a half to 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks of feeling amazing, better than I had in like 10 years, I had this complete crash that was very, very obvious. Anhedonia, depression, low energy, no creativity. I couldn't sleep. I felt bad after working out despite having lifted weights my entire life, so I know exactly how I should feel after I work out. And of course, horrible brain fog. And that's when everything in my life started breaking. Within around a year or two of crashing from these drugs, I lost my job, which I had held the same job for 10 years, so I lost my job. And then shortly after that, I lost my girlfriend, which I had been with for 5 years. It sucked. I was having to use credit cards to pay for everything, so I'm racking up debt. And while my parents, I couldn't say they didn't abandon me. I think they suspected it was like a phase or just something that was all in my head, which really didn't help. I really wanted that support of someone who believed me completely. And I didn't even know what post-Finasteride syndrome was at that point. I didn't even link all of this to Finasteride, at least the crash. I knew that I wasn't feeling optimal because of Finasteride, but I didn't link the crash to Finasteride at that point. For the longest time, I just thought I was feeling terrible for some other reason. I kept making things up like maybe I just needed to get out more or something like that. I didn't even know it was humanly possible to take a drug, stop it, and then continue to have side effects. To me, that's why the idea that anyone should call post-Finasteride syndrome a placebo effect or say it's just in our minds is so crazy, because I believed 100% with all my heart and mind that stopping the drug would return me to exactly the way I was pre-Finasteride, yet the opposite happened. If anything, placebo effect should have made me believe I'm perfectly fine, since that's what I was expecting. But clearly that didn't happen. I was fully expecting to return to normal, but it didn't happen. So placebo is definitely not applicable to this syndrome, to post-Finasteride syndrome. So then after several months of feeling awful and going to doctors with no answer, I read about post-Finasteride syndrome and saw other people describe exactly what I experienced, and that is when I knew. I created an account on Propecia Health forums and ended up with the username BrongFogBoy, which is actually supposed to be Brain Fog Boy, but I literally couldn't think clearly enough to even type my name correctly at that point, and I was apathetic, so I just left it. Okay, so that's me. Now let's get right to what you really want to hear about. I'm just going to tell it right now, and then I'll explain in detail after this. So what I did to recover, it's basically this: an extremely high dose of iodine, followed by a fecal transplant from a healthy donor. A fecal transplant is exactly what it sounds like. It's when you take someone else's stool or poop and get it inside your butt, pretty much. If you don't know about this, it's been used in the medical community for years with extremely high success rates of certain gastrointestinal problems. You should definitely Google search it. It's a real thing, and it's known in the scientific community. It's not just me coming up with some kind of zany idea for a weekend. So it definitely has science backing it. It's a proven therapy for certain things. It's not yet proven to work for post-Finasteride syndrome, but apparently it worked for me. So I'm going to give you the extremely condensed version of all this, otherwise this video would be hours and hours long. In my attempt to cure myself, so this is kind of how it all started. When I was trying to cure myself, I started basically testing and trying everything possible. And one of the things I did was a stool test to see what my microbiome looked like. That's where I found a smoking gun. Take a look at this test. The doctor who ran this test and reviewed the results with me said that what we were looking at was extremely unusual, and I believe she even commented that she's never seen that before on any stool test from anyone. Basically, what my test here is showing is almost, if not the complete absence of the major beneficial bacterias that should be found in the body, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. I basically had no growth at all. And I don't want this video to be an hour long, so I'll just say, if that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, please do yourself a favor, read the science behind the importance of the microbiome. It pretty much affects everything in the body. So after I got this test, we got other people on the Propecia help boards and Solve PFS boards at the time posted their stool tests. And from what I remember, like 95% of them showed they were missing these beneficial bacteria. I started off taking, in order to remedy this, I started taking really high doses of beneficial bacteria probiotics to replace it. One of which was VSL number 3. If you look that up, it's a medical grade, extremely expensive probiotic, the best thing that you can buy. And I didn't really feel any difference at all. So no, I do not think probiotics are going to work for post-Finasteride syndrome. I really don't. Eventually, that led me to reading about fecal transplants. And to everyone wondering how anyone could do such a disgusting thing, let that be a testament to how bad my symptoms were. I was pretty much desperate and willing to do almost anything if it had a chance of fixing me. And I didn't even go to a clinic either. I just pretty much did it myself. I couldn't afford to go to a clinic. So it was definitely as nasty and as messy as it sounds, although after several attempts, I kind of got down this good process and it really wasn't too bad. I was just kind of used to it, maybe just desensitized. If you want to read about the first transplant, just read my game over PFS posts that I made on the Propecia help forums. Basically, it worked for one day and then just stopped working. And I had PFS again, and I tried multiple times again and again. I could never get the fecal transplant to work. Later on, I even tried from a different donor. The first was a female donor. Obviously, I'm male, so the first donor was from a female because I had read gender doesn't really matter. And this next time I tried it from a male donor and it still didn't work. Fast forward a few years, I don't remember the exact timeline, but I read about how bacteria, fungus, and biofilms could possibly prevent good bacteria from proliferating. So I decided to add in iodine because I figure, well, you know, if I put in this good transplant from a healthy donor, maybe that's why it can't grow. Because there's something in there, a bacteria or a fungus, something, whatever it is, that's keeping it from working. So again, that's where I added in iodine. And I want to remind you again here, I'm not suggesting anyone do what I did because it could be dangerous, but the amount of iodine I took was actually 1,000 milligrams or 1 gram of iodine for 7 days straight, mixed in orange juice. And this wasn't Lugol's solution, if you've ever seen that. It was pure iodine that I bought on Amazon. Now, to give you an idea of how much iodine this is, iodine content found in foods is as low as a microgram, which it takes 1,000 micrograms to make 1 milligram. And I took 1,000 milligrams. Taking it as a supplement is typically around 2 to 4 milligrams. So I took around 500 times the typical dose.